Imagine you are standing in a room that has not seen light in 3,000 years. The air doesn't move. It simply sits, pressing against your skin like a held breath, dense with the smell of pine resin, cedar oil, and natron salt, baked into stone over 30 centuries of silence. In front of you, wrapped in linen so precisely layered it took 70 days to complete, is a human being. Not a symbol, not a museum exhibit, a person. Someone who laughed, who held a child's hand, who watched the Nile flood every summer and believed the gods were keeping their promise. Someone who looked up at these same stars, your stars, and trusted completely that this wrapping, this ritual, this act of devotion would carry them into eternity. They were wrong, in ways that would have broken them. Today, through forensic archaeology, CT scanning, ancient DNA analysis, and AI facial reconstruction, we are going to unwrap 3,000 years of silence. And in 2019, archaeologists unsealed a chamber at Saqqara that not one of them was prepared for what was waiting inside. Before you can understand what a mummy is, you must understand where mummies come from. Not from pharaohs, not from ritual, not from priests with obsidian blades. They come from the desert itself. The Nile Valley, this narrow green corridor no wider than a few miles in many stretches, was one of the most productive agricultural strips on the ancient planet. Every summer, the Nile flooded with near mathematical regularity, dragging rich black silt down from the Ethiopian highlands and spreading it across the floodplain like an annual blessing. The Egyptians called this strip Kemet, the Black Land, the land of the living. But step a few hundred meters from the river's edge, and life ends. Absolutely. Without negotiation. The Egyptians called the desert Deshret, the Red Land, the land of death. And the Red Land had a secret it had been keeping for tens of thousands of years. When a body is buried in deep hyper-arid desert sand, sealed from moisture, bacteria, and oxygen, it does not decompose, it desiccates. The water evacuates the tissue. The skin contracts against the skeleton, like leather slowly cured over centuries. The features lock. The person, in a grotesque and accidental miracle, persists. The Gebelein Man died around 3,500 BCE. Before the pyramids, before unified Egypt, before hieroglyphics had settled into their final form. And yet you can stand in the British Museum today and look directly at his face. Still there, still his. The Red Land returned him across 55 centuries without losing a single feature. The ancient Egyptians did not invent mummification from theology alone. They watched the desert performing it naturally, all around them. And then they made a decision that would define 3,000 years of civilization. They would improve on what the desert was already doing. They would take its cold, accidental gift and make it intentional, systematic, and absolute. But the men who performed that work every single day, who dedicated their entire lives to preserving the dead, the forensic evidence now suggests they were carrying a biological secret inside their own bones, a secret sealed inside the very bodies they wrapped. And it would take a CT scanner 3,000 years later to finally find it. You're inside that workshop before dawn. The man at the first stone table, a WT priest, an embalmer, has been doing this work since he was 12. His hands are stained permanently with resin and natron. After years of working with preservation resins and ancient organic materials, the administrative papyri suggest his sense of smell has become something entirely his own, a private internal landscape no one else can enter. His name, reconstructed from occupation records at Deir el Medina, might have been something like Amenhotep Sahapu. He is not a mystic. He is a specialist on a production line. And the product is immortality, charged by weight of silver. Herodotus documented 3 tiers of service. The cheapest, cedar oil injected into the body cavity, the entrance sealed, the corpse left to dissolve internally. the liquefied organs drained. Efficient, stripped of dignity. The most expensive, 70 days, full natron packing, individual organ extraction into 4 alabaster canopic jars, lungs, liver, stomach, intestines, each placed under the guardianship of one of the 4 sons of Horus. Amenhotep wears an Anubis mask, lacquered black wood, jackal ears tall, not for theater, but as ritual identification. He becomes the god during the sacred procedure. The first incision on the left flank is always made with obsidian, because obsidian fractured correctly produces an extraordinarily fine edge, among the sharpest cutting instruments the ancient world ever produced. The brain is removed through the nostril using a long bronze hook rotated against the ethmoid bone until it gives way, worked upward in slow, precise movements. The procedure is methodical, deliberate, unhurried. The mark of a craftsman who has done this 10,000 times. Then, and this is the detail that will eventually unlock everything, hot pine resin is poured into the emptied skull, cooling into a perfect cast of the interior brain case. The heart is never touched. It holds IB, the moral intelligence, the memory, the soul's ledger, to be weighed against the feather of Ma'at on the day of judgment. The brain, by contrast, is considered biological packing material, worthless, disposable. That resin, poured in and forgotten by a man who believed the brain was worthless, would become, 30 centuries later, the most important substance in the history of Egyptological research. Because when scientists slid one of those resin-filled skulls into a CT scanner, they didn't find an ancient curiosity. They found a sealed genetic archive containing the biological identities of people the entire historical record had chosen to forget. And what those identities revealed threatened to overturn the origin story of Egyptian civilization itself. The skull is not empty. The resin poured into that cranial cavity 3,000 years ago did not merely preserve the shape of a human brain, it preserved fragments of the brain tissue itself, microscopic, cellular, trapped in a pine resin matrix that functioned accidentally and perfectly as a biological time capsule across 3 millennia. In 2017, a landmark genomic study published in Nature Communications announced the successful extraction and sequencing of ancient DNA from mummies at Abu Sir el-Melek, a site occupied continuously from roughly 1388 BCE through 426 CE. What the sequenced genomes revealed landed in the Egyptological community like a controlled detonation. Ancient Egyptians from the New Kingdom and late period shared their closest genetic ancestry with populations from the Levant and Anatolia, the people of what is now Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey, specifically showing strong continuity with Neolithic farmers who had moved into the Nile Valley from the Near East thousands of years earlier. But Roman period mummies told a different story entirely. Post 30 BCE, after Cleopatra's death and Egypt's absorption as a Roman province, sub-Saharan African genetic markers appeared in the mummy record in a sudden, statistically significant spike, consistent with forced migration, military conscription, and the industrial-scale movement of people that Rome orchestrated across the African continent. And then the teeth confirmed it. Strontium and oxygen isotope ratios locked into tooth enamel during childhood carry a precise mineralogical signature of wherever a child grew up. You cannot change it. You cannot forge it. Multiple mummies interred with full Egyptian funerary rites. Canopic jars, shabtis, the complete theological apparatus of a proper Egyptian death, have teeth that say they were born in Nubia, in the Aegean, in territories thousands of kilometers away, carried across the ancient world, stripped of their origins, wrapped in the rituals of a civilization that claimed them in life and refused to release them even in death. If that haunts you, the idea that a mummy's teeth are the only honest record of a stolen life. Type silent witness in the comments below. Because the isotope analysis of child mummies found sealed inside a Saqqara chamber, children from at least 4 different geographic origins who died within weeks of each other, pointed to something the written record had only whispered: a catastrophe so swift and so total, it was filling tombs faster than the priests could complete the sacred rites, and no army had been anywhere near them. In 2019, a joint Italian-Egyptian team unsealed a subsidiary chamber in the Saqqara necropolis, undisturbed since approximately 600 BCE, over 2,500 years of sealed darkness. The team's field notes record the discovery in careful, professional language, but several researchers in later interviews described simply standing at the threshold and not moving for a long time. Then they saw why. The chamber contained mummies, but not adults, not priests or soldiers who had lived full lives and been honored with complete ceremony. Children, infants, wrapped bundles no longer than your forearm, laid in careful rows along the chamber walls as if someone had needed, desperately, to put them somewhere safe. Some had not lived long enough to accumulate a name in any funerary record. CT imaging revealed internal damage patterns consistent with a fast-moving, high lethality infectious disease. Bone density and developmental analysis confirmed the deaths clustered within weeks, not years. And the isotope data showed these children had come from multiple geographic origins, different genetic backgrounds, different groundwater signatures in their teeth, yet died together in the same settlement within the same catastrophic window of time. The historical record speaks directly to this. Between 249 CE and 262 CE, the plague of Cyprian moved through the Roman Empire from Britain to Egypt like fire through dry grain and left nothing standing in its path. Bishop Cyprian of Carthage, who witnessed it firsthand, wrote of a sickness that arrived without warning and departed only when entire households had gone silent. At its peak, contemporary sources record the scale of loss in Rome alone as beyond anything the city's living memory could hold. The mummy record confirms it without needing a single written word. A sharp demographic spike in non-adult burials. Funerary wrappings rushed and incomplete. Ritual objects missing. The sacred rites abbreviated. Because the priests were overwhelmed and the bodies were arriving faster than the living could properly honor them. 3,000 years of civilization, outlasting every empire, every drought, every military conquest the ancient world could produce, brought to silence not by an army, by something invisible, something that moved through crowded air and made no distinction between the sacred and the enslaved. And the most devastating revelation was still 2,000 years away, waiting for a machine that could map the interior of sealed tombs from the desert surface without disturbing a single grain of sand, and confirm exactly how many more silent chambers were still down there, still perfectly preserved, still holding their secrets in the dark. This is where the story stops being about death and starts being about recognition. In 2021, a Brazilian forensic team used multi-layer CT scanning combined with AI facial approximation software to reconstruct the face of mummy KV35YL, the younger lady from the Valley of the Kings. DNA analysis published in JAMA had established her as almost certainly Tutankhamun's mother, identified as the royal wife Kia of the 18th dynasty. What resolved on screen was not a goddess, not a stylized profile lifted from a painted tomb wall. A young woman, slightly asymmetrical features, as real faces always are, because real faces are shaped by lived experience, not by artists trying to please the divine. A strong jaw, cheekbones carrying the particular definition of someone whose life was not soft. An expression the software cannot classify, but which every researcher in that room described, independently, with the same single word: tired. She looked, one researcher noted in a published account, like someone you might pass in a Cairo market on an ordinary afternoon and forget entirely before reaching the next stall. This is what AI reconstruction does that no artifact, no translation, no museum display can replicate. It gives you a face, and a face collapses 3,000 years into a single involuntary moment of human recognition. The instant your brain registers another person looking back at you across the entirety of history. And the pipeline of discovery is accelerating faster than most people realize. Ground-penetrating radar deployed across the Saqqara Plateau since 2020 has now identified over 17 distinct, unexcavated subterranean chambers, sealed since antiquity. Their radar signatures consistent with intact burial assemblages and undisturbed organic material. Each one a sealed room. Each one a held breath. Mummies that have never been touched, never been scanned, never been named. Waiting in the precise darkness the ancient priests left them in, carrying complete human biographies the desert has guarded without being asked, without being thanked, and without losing a single page. You are standing at the threshold of the greatest archaeological era in human history. Not because we are finding new things buried in the sand, because we are finally, after 3,000 years, understanding the things we already had. Here is what the mummies have been trying to tell us for 3,000 years. Every civilization believes it has solved the problem of time. The ancient Egyptians believed it so completely, they built an entire theological architecture around it. 70 days of ritual, kilometers of linen, 4 alabaster jars, the careful practiced hands of men like Amenhotep Sahapu. All of it assembled in service of one desperate universal human need. Don't forget us. And in the most profound irony in the history of civilization, it worked. Not through resurrection, not through the reunion of Ba and Ka in the golden fields of Aru, but through forensic genomics reading ancient DNA from skull resin, through CT analysis revealing the story of a child who never lived long enough to be named, through AI software assembling a human face from calcium and mathematics, and 3,000 years of patience. They are remembered, they are found, they are at last seen. If this journey has moved you, subscribe to Forgotten Ages. Every episode, we light one more lamp in the dark. The air still presses against your skin like a held breath, still thick with pine resin and cedar oil and 30 centuries of silence. But now you understand. It was never silence. It was a conversation, and we just learned how to listen.